You just never know when a non-typical buck is going to show up on your property. Why? Well, because non-typical bucks are created in different ways, and mainly it's something you have no control over.
So what's your favorite flavor? Is it a drop tine, a split brow tine, some flyer points, maybe some sticker points? Well, we have them all right here on this week's episode of Deer and Deer Hunting TV.
This is where it all begins.
Woohoo!
That's my best hunting day ever. This is Deer and Deer Hunting TV. Okay, so there's basically four things that cause a buck's rack to be non-typical, and that would be, number one would be hereditary, and the other three mostly are related to injuries. I'm going to talk about the injuries first to give you a better idea. The first one obviously would be an injury to the buck's antler itself. Now that would be the main beam or the points. When that velvet rack is developing, if you look at the rack, the velvet itself is silica. It's basically its hairs on the outside. And the inside, that developing antler, which becomes, we call bone, is basically bundles of collagen. And when a rack becomes to a certain stage and those collagen bundles become injured, whether it's a cut or it's a deep bruise or something like that, it causes them to change shape.
What happens when a deer's in velvet and it's walking around the woods, jumping across a fence, and it hits its antler, it can deform it during certain stages of the antler growth when it is in velvet. Here is a really good example of that. This is a buck I found while shed antler hunting. It's a deadhead, but you can see right here, this main beam is tipped down, and that buck hit something when it was in velvet and bent that main beam and caused the buck to not have very good deformity. And voila, you have a non-typical buck.
The second type of injury that you see would be to the antler base itself. And a lot of times what you'll see there are little sticker points coming out from the antler bases, maybe an extra brow tine or kind of sort of a brow tine. A lot of times if you look at a rack, I've shot several deer like this. The most recent that I can remember was in Wyoming a couple of years ago. But that rack on that buck would have been a normal 8-point rack, 4x4. But on the one side, he only basically had 4 points, but 2 of the points were low. One was the brow tine and one was coming out next to the brow tine. I suspect on that deer, he had an injury to his antler base itself. Absolutely covered up in deer. We have 4 shooter bucks, big ones, right out in front of us. I hope they come this way. Got him, got him, got him, got him. We got him, we got him. Watch him go, stay on him. Stay on him. Blood is just pouring out of him. pouring out of him. Go down, baby. He went down right there, right in the edge of the field. Yes! Yeah, oh my gosh. Oh. We watched this buck for a half an hour. He came across this field. He's a good mature buck. Early season Wyoming. We saw 50 deer tonight. We saw 25 bucks, 25 rack bucks. And he came up to take a drink right from this water tank here. And I could not hold it together. And I had to lean out. We forgot our chairs. We're sitting on a Rubbermaid tote that was in the back of Eric Dunn's pickup truck. And I got him right through there. Yes!
Coming up next, Dan and Mark provide some more reasons as to why bucks may not have typical antlers and whether or not they'll be that way year after year. This is Deer and Deer Hunting TV. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting TV is brought to you by Hunt Stand. Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Cuddyback. Cuddy Link, 16 cameras, 1 cell plan, $10 per month. Hornady, accurate, deadly, dependable. Get armed and deadly with Easton FMJ arrows. And by Scent Killer Gold with Hunt Dry Technology Plus. Apply it, dry it, and go hunt. Injury reason number 1. Accidental damage caused prior to the hardening of the velvet-covered collagen. Reason number 2. Damage directed specifically to the base of the antler. And reason number 3. Well, let's hear it from the pros.
So the third injury factor would be to the antler base itself, again, just like number 2. But in this case, the antlers are already hardened, the deer is polished, and he maybe is fighting or something like that, and that antler breaks off. And when that antler breaks off, part of the antler base breaks off with it. This can be a devastating injury for a buck, and a lot of times what happens is they will develop what is called cranial abscess disease as an after effect of that injury. What happens is that pedicle, that antler base, breaks off, a piece of the skull goes with it, and then in subsequent growing years, that buck might have a non-typical rack. It's seen a lot in places that have high preponderances of mature bucks, places like South Texas where they manage real heavily, places like Midwest in Iowa and Illinois and Wisconsin and even Minnesota and other places where they have older age classes of bucks, lower buck-to-doe ratios, and a lot of fighting happens during the rut. And you're going to see those types of injuries and subsequent antler growth in those situations. So where does that leave genetics? I saved that for last, the best for last, so to speak. Genetics ultimately will dictate how big a buck's rack is going to be when he hits maturity. Now that is something very interesting with genetics, is you'll see it in regions. Now you'll see it, like I said, in South Texas, where there's areas that will have high incidences of bucks with drop tines. If you get up into my neck of the woods in western Wisconsin, you're going to see, especially like over in Buffalo County, home of the giant bucks, you're going to see deer with big non-typical racks that are genetic. You see this in places like Alberta, and you see in other places, in some places of Iowa. But also, when you think about genetics, you also think about places where they don't have non-typicals, but like in Western New York, you'll have a lot of deer with just 8 and 10 point racks, clean racks, typical racks. But a lot of times you'll see in certain local regional areas, bucks might have a certain configuration on those racks. They might have a longer right brow tine than left brow tine, or the configuration on the 8s and the 10s is the same. This is the same, is seen a lot of times with non-typical genetic traits. You'll see certain areas that might throw deer just with weird, double brow tines, split G2s, like I said, drop tines, flyers, kickers, the little points that go off the sides. Sometimes those are not the result of injury, and it's just a matter of what happens to be in the genetic makeup of that local region.
Now, outlining the ways bucks can become so-called non-typical, are they going to be that way year after year? Well, that's not necessarily so. Now, in the case of genetics, it tends to get more augmented or just more of it as they get older. Not always, but most of the time. It's the injury part. If they bump that antler and cause it to go down, weird swing of the main beam or something, that may not happen year after year. The next year, they may not bump it may be a perfect, great looking 5x5 buck. Now, as far as if they have an injury to their body, yeah, that is probably going to cause them, if it's a severe injury, to be on the opposite side, a non-typical year after year. If it's just a 1-year injury, maybe they just broke their leg or twisted an ankle or something like that and it fixes itself, probably not as much. But if you go back to that genetic code, yeah, they're not typical. They're going to be every single year.
Coming up next, Mark considers antlers on the opposite side of the symmetrical spectrum. Will large typical bucks be the same year after year? Find out next on Deer and Deer Hunting TV. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Outdoor Edge. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Redneck Blinds.
Now say you have a whitetail buck and he's a 140, a 150, a 160. You can invite me over to hunt, by the way. But if you've got a jumbo like that, is he going to be that big year after year? Well, you'd hope so, but there are some factors that can cause him to actually have ground shrinkage right there when it's on his head. And what happens? Well, certain years, deer can get stressed, and winter stress is the hardest of all on a deer. That's why they shed their antlers, and stress can actually cause them to shed their antlers even sooner. Now, if they're too stressed, even after they get rid of those antlers and they go through a hard winter, what happens is they rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. They're robbing parts of their own body and taking every little bit of extra energy they have and using it to stay alive. So that robs that initial energy burst when they're trying to grow their antlers in the spring, and especially if that winter extends into spring. So you can expect sometimes in severe conditions like that, yeah, it could cause a buck not to have as big an antler.
Should I give them minerals or should I give them food? If I have to just say one thing, the most important thing for antler development and antler potential and manifesting antler potential is food. You have to provide that deer not only enough food, tonnage, you have to supply the right amount of food, but you also have to supply the right kinds of food, and that's mostly protein. They're gonna get those minerals through the soil. You know, that plant is just a vector of what's in the soil. So what's in the soil, that's gonna be uptake into the deer, but they need a lot of food. And most research will show that a mature buck needs about 2 tons of forage in a year. That's a lot of food, man. You know, you have to think about how are you providing that? And if you're sitting on your little property like I am, you know, you're hunting 17 acres of habitat and you've got a little 1/4 acre food plot, you know, that's good, but that's not enough food for the whole year. So you got to think about, okay, what's around me? Is that deer being supplied that amount of food? Or do I need to go hunt somewhere else where I can provide more food like that? A perfect example of this is our own Steve Bartilla. You know, he manages a lot of properties across North America, and the prime one that I've seen, because I've hunted there with him for several years now, is in Illinois. So this year we got to hunt with Steve again, and the day we showed up, he happened to be out that afternoon before we got back. He was out with his Wicked Ridge, and he was hunting for both things. He was hunting for both does and bucks, but he had his eye on a couple bucks that he really wanted to take. And we got there just in time to see the end result of a successful hunt for an enormous 8-pointer.
Before I'm even done taping up the curtains and stuff, I've seen 5 different bucks.
Wow.
Cruising, working the maize and the corn.
Wow.
And spilling out right in front of me, and he was actually, you know, I mentioned that naturally there's a flow like this and like this. Well, he came all the way from back in here somewhere, hit that maize, and is coming through, and the maize actually, there's either he can keep going straight down there or he can turn into the plot. Well, I was banking on it turning into the plot. You know, didn't turn into the plot. So I went ahead and grabbed the grunt tube and hit a deep tending grunt. Freeze. Boom. Look. He's like, I don't really want to push it. I mean, he's only 60 yards away and he's staring right at the redneck. They're acting like this is still the peak of the rut. Okay. There's a pretty good chance that even if I don't get a shot at him now, he'll end up circling. I mean, geez, I still got 2.5 hours left, 2 hours left. Well, there's a good chance he'll circle back around. It's about 5 minutes later now. I'm actually thinking this buck has left my life. And there's a 2.5-year-old that's out there in the plot, and all of a sudden he's looking back towards the, let's turn the camera back on again here. Sure enough, he comes out the other side, and the 2.5-year-old's is standing there looking all sheepish. And I'm thinking right then that this is gonna be perfect.
Very, very mature 8. I wasn't able to get the shot on film. As I said, I don't pretend to be a TV hunter in any way, shape, or form. But truly mature 8, actually the deer I was really hoping I'd see tonight. And I did. Heck of a blood trail. Always nice when things work.
Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Sever Broadheads, straight through it. 10-Point Crossbow Technologies, there is no substitute. And by Outdoor Edge, make the cut. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Matthews.
Genetics. It's in their genetic code to be a non-typical. Here's a good example of that. My largest whitetail to date come off this ranch that this same non-typical buck come off of. And you can see he's starting to get little kicker points, sticker points, stuff showing up, fork G2s, all of the same characteristics on this other giant buck that I shot. Now, had I let this buck go a year or 2 more, maybe 3, he probably would have been a giant too. Regardless, it's a great buck and is one I couldn't pass up. Could you?
You know, one thing we know through research is deer are communal animals, and that means they like to communicate with each other through scent. The licking branch and the scrape are 2 powerful things that deer use throughout the year, and especially that licking branch. We know that fawns, does, bucks of all ages use that licking branch in a hot area. And a lot of times this is indicated by a well-used trail where 2 trails intersect, food plots, that type of thing. So what I like to do during these off-season months is keep those areas active even more. And that's where I get my cutty back cameras out and I can really census what's out there. 2 of the products I use my Magnum scrape drippers that I use in fall, and I'm using this new scent this year. It's called Active Chem from Wildlife Research Center. This is a non-urine based scent. It's an attractant scent, and it really helps charge up especially these scrape drippers. Now it comes with a little wick that you can use if you don't have a scrape dripper. In this case, what I like to do is I like to fill up my scent drippers because this is only gonna put out a couple drops a day and it's gonna make that scent last a lot longer, sometimes several weeks. But what I'm gonna do is as I'm checking those cameras, or if I have a cell cam, I might just go back every couple weeks to make sure that scent is supplied in the canister. And that's gonna allow me to keep those deer coming through that area, getting pictures of them, and best of all, getting a census of what I'm gonna be able to hunt come hunting season.
With the pandemic scare, we're all about saving money, right? Well, one way to do it with your trail cameras is consider something new, like the CuddyLink system by CuddyBack. No cellular, no Wi-Fi, one mothership, the mother unit, captures all of these other units' information. All the images you set up for up to 15 are gonna go to this one camera you can check. Now the important thing is Have that mother unit in an area where you can drive up to it or access easily, and then you can get all these images right off it. Some other things to consider when you're putting these cameras up: always point them north or south. East or west, you get that extreme sunset and sunrise. Now, if you live way north in the winter time, that southerly hemisphere might be hard too. So then you want to point it north. Next thing to do, never have that unit set up straight at the trail. Always kind of angling, and it's best if you can find a trail where the deer are filtering away. That way it gives these fast recycling units time to catch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images instead of just one, and then it's over. The last thing to consider, especially if you've got a big mature buck you're after who's maybe a little paranoid, hang that unit up looking down. You can get that unit just a little bit above the eye level of a deer. They won't see it, and trespassers, they might not see it either.